The sky tears away in an instant, and Earth is left naked in the black glare of space. Air rips upward in a violent, invisible surge as oceans and cities feel the vacuum pull. Daylight stays, but the blue is gone and stars pierce through a hard and empty sky. Sunlight slams into the ground unfiltered, and the world feels suddenly exposed and raw. Streets fall silent as sound dies with the air, and people look up in stunned confusion. Breaths fail in chests as lungs search for air that is no longer there to hold life. Planes begin to drop from the sky as wings lose lift in a world with no wind at all. Smoke, dust, and loose debris surge upward, then fall back in eerie, slow silence. Shadows sharpen to knife edges as light travels straight with nothing left to soften it. From space, Earth still looks familiar, but the soft blue halo that meant life is gone. Oceans begin to hiss and bubble as the weight of air disappears from their surface. Lakes and rivers turn to mist at the top, while their depths cling to the last traces of calm. Inside the body, blood begins to form tiny bubbles as pressure slips toward nothing. Moisture escapes from skin and eyes, and every breath feels thin and painfully empty. Fire gutters and dies because there is no longer oxygen to feed a living flame. Explosions flash with no echo as shock waves fade quickly in the thinning air. Heat no longer moves by wind and convection, and it simply leaks away into space. Plants droop and collapse as water pours out of their cells into the dead, dry world. Animals stagger, gasp and fall as their bodies fight a battle the air has already lost. Mountains stand untouched while everything that needs breath begins to fade around them. On the dayside, the ground begins to scorch as sunlight pours in with relentless force. On the night side, warmth rushes into space and cities freeze faster than any winter storm. Stone and metal expand and contract so fast that cracks race across buildings like lightning. The top of the sea boils while deeper water clings to the last cool layers below. Deserts glow with rising heat, while nearby shadows drop toward bitter, frozen silence. A car left in the sun becomes an oven, while a car in shade turns into a sudden freezer. Around the equator, land bakes under a sun that feels sharper, closer than ever. Mountain peaks glint with ice while sunlit slopes cook under the same brutal star. From orbit, half the planet shines with harsh brilliance and half sinks into deep blue cold. At the edges of light and dark, a thin band of unstable twilight trembles between extremes. Without air to shield it, the ground takes the full strike of invisible solar radiation. Human skin burns in minutes as the sun becomes less like a light and more like a weapon. Electronics glitch and fail as high-energy particles hammer circuits that were never protected. Satellites stumble in their orbits as solar storms reach them with nothing to slow the impact. Earth's magnetic field strains alone while charged particles slam into the unguarded surface. Forests that survived the first shock begin to dry and darken under the constant ultraviolet glare. Oceans absorb radiation that once stopped high in the sky, and life near the surface withers. At noon, the sun looks small yet impossibly harsh in a black dome with no blue veil. Cities glow under hard light, and every roof and road soaks up energy with no relief. From space, streaks of solar wind can be seen striking straight onto a naked and silent world. Sea ice thickens over frozen oceans while scattered pools of liquid water hide below. Once green forests collapse into fields of dried trunks and shattered branches. Dust lifts then settles in place because there is no wind left to sculpt dunes or storms. Skylines stand over empty streets and glass towers are lit only by a harsh white sun. Cars, rails and bridges twist as years of gentle weather are replaced by brutal swings in heat. Long, sharp shadows stretch across land and never blur since no haze remains to soften them. Frozen animals lie preserved where they fell, as decay slows in the cold vacuum touch. Weather maps go blank because clouds and storms no longer exist in any form. Volcanoes still breathe heat, but their steam vanishes straight into space without a trace. Seen from orbit, continents look sharper and harder, and the planet feels strangely still. Cracks open in the sea ice as deep water tries to move beneath a frozen shell. Nightside deserts become glassy plains where sand has fused under sudden freezing. Equatorial regions show patches of dark fused rock where soil once held living roots. Cities sink under layers of ice while rust and frost crawl slowly across steel and stone. Rivers freeze mid-current, and frozen ripples stand like sculptures that never melt. Cliffs shed slabs of rock as temperature swings tear layers from their faces. No clouds, no rain, and no mist soften the view as every edge remains sharp for centuries. The crust cools from the top down, and new fracture lines carve patterns across continents. Exposed seafloors dry into endless beds of salt and cracked mud under the hard sun. From afar, Earth now looks less like an ocean world and more like a faded rocky sphere. Years pass, and the last colors begin to fade as dust and ice settle into a dull grey coat. With no wind to move them, rocks and footprints remain almost unchanged for ages. Coastlines keep their sharp outlines since waves no longer chew them into gentle curves. Oceans rest as solid masses of ancient ice that glitter faintly when sunlight glances off them. Radiation slowly bleaches surface minerals until even stone begins to lose its deep hues. The magnetic field weakens over time, and fewer charged particles are drawn into graceful arcs. Cities remain frozen monuments to a world that once had air, color, sound, and rain. Mountains stand almost timeless and unshaped since erosion has lost its main carving tools. At night, the planet reflects little light and hangs in space as a dim and quiet marble. From far away, Earth resembles a cold cousin of Mars with ice where seas once moved. Meteors strike the ground without warning, and each new crater stays crisp and fresh. Scars from countless impacts cover the crust and record a history with no weather to erase it. After millions of years, the world is frozen, cracked, and silent, but still circling the sun. What was once a blue and living planet has become a dry and airless rock in a familiar orbit. If Earth ever lost its atmosphere in a single instant, life would vanish fast, but the planet would drift on in silence.